angels who sinned having these giants, were actually sent to Tartarus. In the Greek, that's what the word is. It's the lowest part of hell. And I'm going to show you that in Scripture. I'm going to keep moving, and then you're going to see it in the Scriptures. This is actually mentioned in the book of Jude and in Peter. This is not the angels that fell with Lucifer. There's two different sections here. There are angels that fell with Lucifer in the original, where they're cast out of heaven. In the original pride. And you'll see that in Ezekiel, where Lucifer lifts himself up and says, I should be God. And he is thrown out of heaven. And Jesus said, I saw you fall from heaven like lightning. That's the original casting of angels. Those angels actually became principalities and powers in the heavenlies. They were cast out of, there's three heavens. There's God's throne in heaven, okay? Then there's space and the planets and the universe, that atmosphere of heaven. And then there's the atmosphere above the earth, what we call a first heaven. And that's heaven. And that's where they have domain. The principalities and the powers of the air. That's why when we go into a region and begin to preach the gospel, we sometimes when you get prophetic, you understand this. You'll feel that there's a stronghold over a region. It's because there's spirits that have been in control of that region, whether through witchcraft or different things. Those, again, are those fallen, that's the fallen beings, okay, that are with Lucifer. But this is a different angel. These are angels that specifically were sent to the earth to teach men wisdom and knowledge. And in their dealings with human beings, they fell. And they sinned because they had no right to marry these women and take on relationships with these women. They weren't supposed to do that. They were there for a purpose. They didn't fulfill their purpose. And they created evil. And these beings became so evil, they ran the earth. They just rampantly ran the earth, okay? So, let me go into 2 Peter chapter 2. Let me show you where this is at. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 through 5. For God did not even spare angels that sinned, but he casted them into hell. And actually, if you look that up, the word hell there says Tartarus in the Greek. It's not talking about Gehenna, the lake of fire. It's not talking about Sheol, the grave. It's not talking about, or Hades. And it actually says Tartarus, which is, it actually means the lowest part of hell, okay? Delivering them to be kept there in the pits of gloom until their judgment and their doom. There will be a day God will pull them out of there to judge them. They were casted down there because God called them to be casted down there because of their sin. And verse 5, he spared not the ancient world, but preserved Noah. So ancient world he's talking about before the flood. But he preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 other persons. He's talking about all of Noah's family. When he brought a flood upon the world of ungodly people. Okay? Jude. Sorry, I'm trying to find my scriptures. Where did that go? Jude 1. Well, of course, there's only one Jude, sorry. I don't know why I said. Verse 6 says, and the angels who do not keep care for and guard and hold to their own first place of power, but abandon their proper dwelling place, these he has reserved in custody in eternal chains and bonds, under a thick gloom of utter darkness until the judgment and the doom of that great day. So you got to understand, this was common teaching back then, okay? In the early century, with these new leaders in the church, this was common knowledge. They understood the history of the world. But since the 4th century, we were not taught it in church. We weren't taught it because it was decided to be covered up for a couple different reasons. One of them having to do with the argument about if angels can sin, then that means our priests could sin. We don't want to know that because our priests are supposed to be celibate. This was in the Catholic Church, okay? So they took the history and buried it. But it was still in the Word. It just wasn't in their teachings. And so for a long time, this was not taught in church, and the history of understanding what happened and how God. And so for years, and I remember hearing this as a kid, if you have a loving God, then why would he kill everybody in the flood? Here's your answer. Are you ready? They weren't human. They were corrupted seed. And the only one that was pure was Noah and his kids. None of them had Nephilim in their blood. But everyone else was corrupted. God was dealing with a corrupted race that was evil. Go back to the Word. What did it say? They were evil continually. I'm not sure if we understand that kind of evil. But you got to understand, these kids were birthed. These giants were birthed out of absolute rebellion. I'm going to show you a couple things. The Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, is part of the Torah, and it was written by Moses. The Torah is the Old Testament. And it was written 2,000 years after Adam. So there's a lot of history here that took place. But there are early writings, very, very early writings. Some of those were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and some of those were kept by rabbis. There are very early writings, and you look into Jewish history, really look into rabbinical writings, you will find this history is in rabbinical writings. And it's not buried. They teach it. Jewish tradition says that angels asked to go down and teach men wisdom and righteousness because men, for a series of time, were really struggling after the fall. They felt lost. They had no guidance. And so these angels, we don't know the specific number, it doesn't say. But they specifically asked, and God sent them down, and they began to teach. They were supposed to teach them righteousness and wisdom. What they ended up teaching was technology, astrology, witchcraft, sorcery, and every kind of evil.
This is in Jude.
And this is mentioned in Jude, but this is also mentioned in very, very early writings. It is in almost every ancient writing around the world. Has a history of beings coming from the stars to teach men. And what they taught them was not good. And it became evil because they taught them weaponry and war. They didn't teach them God. They taught them knowledge, but it was not a good knowledge. Okay? Knowledge that we didn't need. And what it did is it literally ran rampant, and the world became evil. And so God looked down and said, it's continually evil. And men have now become killers. And it names different people like Nimrod. Nimrod became a hunter of other men. Not just animals. He became a hunter of men. So when you go and study him out, he was very evil. These angels took on a human form when they came. And they taught human beings. In that human form, they sinned by having relationships with these women. And they produced a hybrid human race called the Nephilim and the Giants. And those giants became rulers over men. You will see hieroglyphics in many different nations where they have hieroglyphics of their leaders being super tall and all these servants under them look like ants. Or they have very misshapen heads. You will see that with Nefertiti. She has this huge hat, cone thing. And they had very funky features and different things. But they ruled over men. And that's what they did. They set themselves up as gods, what they call a demigod, to rule over men and to have control.